the sense of time in conventional films is very distorted. I'm just doing it for a particular reason, so it's drawing attention to that fact. But I think in most films, the sense of time is incredibly distorted.
Christopher Nolan is one of the most important directors of modern cinema, one of the few filmmakers who can make movies that feel both like intelligent puzzles and massive spectacles. They challenge the viewer, but they also fill cinemas around the world. Some people see him as a genius.
He's kind of like the Wizard of Oz, except I think he dresses cooler.
Others think he's overrated, but that is the point. He never goes unnoticed. Christopher Edward Nolan was born on July 30th, 1970, in London. His father, Brendan Nolan, worked as a creative writer and later in marketing. His mother, Christina, was American. She worked as a flight attendant and also taught English. Because of his mother's American roots, young Christopher often traveled between England and the United States, and during those trips, he discovered something that would change his life: cinema. When he was 7 years old, he saw Star Wars, and like millions of children, he was completely amazed. But for Nolan, it was more than just entertainment. It was a door opening. A film could create an entire universe. A film could make a child believe in crazy stuff like spaceships, heroes, and impossible worlds. When he returned to England, he told his school friends about Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader before many of them had even seen the movie. Later, when The Empire Strikes Back came out, he wanted to watch it again and again. But his father eventually told him that he would not take him anymore, because George Lucas had already received enough of their money. But Nolan was not only watching films, he was already trying to make them. Using his father's Super 8 camera, he filmed short stories with toys as actors. His first collaborators were his childhood friends, the brothers Adrian and Rocco Bellic, who would also go on to work in the film industry. These were the simple homemade movies, but they already started showing their obsession to building worlds out of their own imagination. During the 70s and 80s, Nolan absorbed the popular culture around him, with cinema staying as his main obsession. He discovered 2001: A Space Odyssey by Stanley Kubrick, for whom I also made a biography video if you want to check it out. The first director he truly idolized, however, was actually Ridley Scott. After watching Alien and Blade Runner, which became one of his favorite films, Nolan understood something important. Films did not simply appear out of nowhere. Someone was shaping them. Someone was controlling the images, the atmosphere, and the rhythm. That was when he began to understand the power of being a director. As he grew older, he bought film stills from vintage shops and placed them on his bedroom wall. He admired filmmakers such as Nicolas Roeg, Fritz Lang, David Lean, and Terrence Malick. He also loved the James Bond films, with their mixture of elegance and practical action. Books were just as important, and Nolan studied crime novels, especially writers like Jim Thompson and James Ellroy. He was drawn to stories about damaged men, betrayal, guilt, and hidden truths. He also reached Charles Dickens and Jorge Luis Borges, writers who played with memory, time, and complicated structures. All these influences would later appear in his cinema, mostly showcasing that reality itself can be questioned. Nolan studied at Hailbury College, an independent school in Hertfordshire. Later, he entered University College London, UCL, where he studied English literature. He chose literature because he wanted to understand stories, characters, and narrative structure. It was not film school, but that was part of the appeal. Nolan was not only learning how to shoot images, but he was learning how to actually write stories. At UCL, he also found the tools he needed. The university had 16mm cameras and editing equipment. He joined the University Film Society and began making more serious shorts. On his first night in student accommodation, he met Emma Thomas. She did not share all of his film tastes, but they connected immediately. They would later become partners both in life and in cinema. Together, they helped run the University Film Society, and while Nolan studied, he kept making films. One of his early shorts was Tarantella, made in 1989 with Rocco Bellic, but it did not reach a large audience. Later came Larceny in 1996, which screened at the Cambridge Film Festival. Around this time, Nolan began working with actor Jeremy Theobald and composer David Julien, two key collaborators in his early career. Then came Doodlebug in 1997. In just 3 minutes, Doodlebug shows a man desperately trying to kill a small creature in his room, only to discover that the creature is another version of himself. It is short and unsettling, but a man trapped in his own mind? That already feels like Nolan. That same year, Nolan married Emma Thomas. Together, they founded their production company, Syncope. The name comes from syncope, a medical term for a loss of consciousness. It was a perfect name for a filmmaker so interested in the mind. After Doodlebug, Nolan was ready to make his first feature film. The idea came from something personal, because his home had been broken into. Nolan wondered what the intruder had thought while looking through his belongings. What could you know about a person by studying the objects they leave behind? That question became Following, released in '98. The film follows Bill, a young writer who follows strangers through London, looking for inspiration. But when one of the men he follows notices him, Bill is pulled into a dangerous world of theft and crime. Following was made for around $6,000. Friends and family helped with money. The crew was tiny, and since most people worked during the week, they filmed on Saturdays. Every scene had to be rehearsed carefully because they could only afford 1 or 2 takes. They shot in black and white, using natural light whenever possible. Nolan did almost everything himself: directing, photography, editing, and even production work. Although his wife Emma Thomas helped with that, Jeremy Theobald starred and also co-produced. David Julian created the music. Even Nolan's mother helped by making sandwiches for the crew. It was basically guerrilla filmmaking, but it taught Nolan discipline. He learned to shoot with one camera. He learned to plan carefully. He learned how to protect a vision even when there was no money. Following also contains small signs of the future. One character is called Cop, a name Nolan would later use in Inception. A Batman logo appears on an apartment door, years before Nolan would reinvent the character. The film traveled through festivals, winning awards in San Francisco and Rotterdam. It attracted attention because of its noir atmosphere, non-linear structure, and obsessive tone. It showed that Nolan was not just another independent filmmaker, he already had a clear voice. And then came Memento. The idea began with his young brother, Jonathan, who had been studying psychology and became interested in anterograde amnesia, a condition where a person cannot form new longer-term memories. He imagined a man who had to leave himself notes in order to survive. During a road trip from Chicago to Los Angeles, Jonathan told the idea to Christopher. Nolan immediately understood its power. He asked if he could turn it into a screenplay. The result was one of the most original thrillers of the 2000s. Memento tells the story of Leonard Shelby, a man searching for his wife's killer. But Leonard cannot remember anything that has just happened. He uses tattoos, Polaroids, and notes to guide himself. The genius of the film is that the audience experiences the same confusion. The main story is told backwards, scene by scene, so we are always trying to understand the truth at the same time as Leonard. Guy Pearce played Leonard. Carrie Ann Moss and John Pantoliano, both known from The Matrix, also joined the cast. The budget was around $9 million, much larger than Following, but still small by Hollywood standards. Nolan shot in the film in only 24 days. His director of photography was Wally Pfister, who would become one of the most important collaborators. Together, they created a sharp, tense, sunburned noir set in motels, cars, and empty rooms. But even after the film was finished, Hollywood did not know what to do with it. Studios thought it was too dark, too complicated, and too difficult to sell. Eventually, Newmarket decided to distribute it themselves. That decision changed Nolan's career. Memento became a critical sensation. Audiences debated its structure. Critics praised its intelligence. The film was nominated for Best Original Screenplay and Best Editing at the Oscars. It proved that a complex film could still be thrilling, emotional, and commercially successful. And after Memento, Hollywood started paying attention. Warner Bros. Hired Nolan to direct Insomnia in 2002. It was a remake of a Norwegian thriller, starring Al Pacino as a detective sent to Alaska to investigate a murder. Robin Williams played the killer in one of his darkest roles. Insomnia was important because it showed that Nolan could work inside the studio system. He could direct major stars and he could handle a bigger budget. The film cost around $46 million and made over $100 million worldwide. He was now a filmmaker that studios could trust. Then came the challenge that would transform his career: Batman. By the early 2000s, Batman had lost so much of his cinematic seriousness that Nolan approached the character not as a comic book fantasy but as a myth that could exist in the real world. Batman Begins explored fear, corruption, and the creation of a hero, making Gotham darker and more believable. And with The Dark Knight, Nolan changed superhero cinema forever. Heath Ledger's Joker was much more than a villain, he represented chaotic evil. The film proved that a blockbuster could be popular, philosophical, and tragic all at the same time. The Dark Knight Rises completed the trilogy on a massive scale, turning Bruce Wayne's story into one about pain and the cost of becoming a legend. But Nolan did not only make Batman films. With The Prestige, he made a story about rivalry. With Inception, he turned dreams into architecture and made one of the most ambitious original blockbusters of the century. With Interstellar, he mixed science fiction with love and survival. And with Dunkirk, he stripped war cinema down to pure tension, using land, sea, and air as 3 timelines moving toward the same movement. With Tenet, he pushed his obsession with time into its most extreme form. And then came Oppenheimer. In many ways, Oppenheimer felt like the film Nolan had been building towards his entire career. Think about it, it had science, obsession, and a man trapped inside the consequences of his own creation. And let's not forget about the crazy visuals with the atomic bomb. But this time, the puzzle was not about a dream or a trick, it was to make history. The film became a huge cultural event and won 7 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director. After decades of being praised, debated, and sometimes even criticized, Nolan finally received the industry's highest recognition. But that award was not the real victory. The real victory was that Oppenheimer proved something rare. Audiences will still go to the cinema for a serious and long uncomplicated adult drama if it is made with enough force and conviction. And that is precisely what makes Nolan unique. However, he doesn't stop here. He wants to challenge himself even further. His last film, The Odyssey, takes him back to one of the oldest adventure stories ever told, Homer's epic tale about Odysseus, the king of Ithaca, trying to return home after the Trojan War. Reports describe it as the most expensive film on his career, with a budget of around $250 million, and the first major film shot entirely on IMAX film cameras. In a way, The Odyssey feels like the natural next step for him. Nolan has always been interested in men trying to find their way back, either back to their planet, back to a lost wife, back to a forgotten truth, or back to a version of themselves they may no longer recognize. In The Odyssey, the question is whether a man can return home after everything he has done and everything he has seen, and that has Nolan written all over it.